Hi, in this video I'm going to present the new MCP server from InfraNodus that you can use in Claude or any AI system that will dramatically enhance your research workflows. The way InfraNodus MCP server works is that it can represent any information like text as a knowledge graph where the main concepts are the nodes, the co-occurrences are the connections, and then based on that and some network science it builds a knowledge graph where it identifies the main topical clusters, so the main topics that exist inside any context, and then also the gaps between them. So how could these topics be better connected in order to generate new ideas? Because when you bridge those topics, this is where new interesting ideas emerge. And now all of those insights are available directly in your Claude interface. So you can basically upload a bunch of papers, or you can even use your existing InfraNodus graph and then interact with it using Claude and also call on the different functions that are available inside InfraNodus. For example, you need a topical overview, you can get that. You want to know what are the most important concepts, which are shown bigger on the graph. You can also retrieve them from InfraNodus directly in Claude. You want to know what the content gaps are so that you can generate new interesting ideas. You can also reiterate through them directly in Claude and have your AI agent run those on any type of data. So it becomes very interesting because whatever you can do inside InfraNodus interface, even generating insight questions that bridge those gaps, now you can do all of that inside Claude. So in this video, I'm going to show you how it works. And first, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to show you what I actually achieved with it, so you can get like an overview of what's possible. And then in the second part of the video, I'm going to show you how you can set this up yourself and use it in your own workflows. And if you don't know what MCPs are, these are basically ways for LLMs to connect to different kinds of applications. So for example, in InfraNodus, there are many different functions that you want your LLM to be able to use. And normally applications would connect through APIs or application programming interfaces, but MCPs are just advanced versions of those where every tool call and every functionality is explained in a way that the model knows what to use. And then the model can connect different MCPs, which become available here. So for example, here you see I have InfraNodus available. I could also add other MCPs and then let them work together and orchestrate them in order to produce interesting results. So this is what it's about. Okay, let's jump right in and let me show you what you can do with the InfraNodus MCP first, and then I'll explain to you how you can do that. So here I have a project where I uploaded 20 research papers on the topic of fractal variability and how it affects the body. And when I upload those papers, I do that into a project in Claude, so it stays separated from the rest of the data I have. And then I ask Claude to generate an overview of the main ideas from all those papers. I find that works quite well because it gets me started and gives me like a high-level overview of the main ideas, right? So here I have an overview of the main ideas. And then what I can do is that I can directly ask Claude what could be an interesting research question to ask here. And Claude automatically identifies which tool it can use inside InfraNodus. So here it thought that, okay, first I'm gonna look for the content gaps inside. So it used this tool here. You see, it shows that it used this tool. It sent some kind of summary of the text to InfraNodus, and then InfraNodus responded with 3 different gaps. So what happens here is exactly this. It had a collection of papers. You can see it visualized now in InfraNodus. These are the same papers. I just uploaded them in InfraNodus, so you can also use InfraNodus for that. And then what it did is that it looked at the gaps between those different topics and then generated some of them that have the largest distance. So these are the topics that are least connected in the context of those 20 documents, right? And here it provided some response here. And then it extracted a question based on those gaps, right? So this is quite interesting because it basically does the same thing as you can do through the interface, but now automatically. So imagine when you connect it to your LLM workflows. For instance, you can do that in NA10, which is an automation tool, and have it analyze a bunch of research papers, generate gaps, questions, and then also provide responses to them using InfraNodus or even different models. Okay, so here you see it generated the question, and then what I did next is that I said, okay, now the overview which you generated for the paper, save them as a graph in InfraNodus. So you can also do that. You see it created a knowledge graph from this text. It also provided a name for it. So then when I open this graph now in my browser, I'm going to see a visualization of the summary that Claude generated using the InfraNodus tool inside InfraNodus itself, right? So this is also pretty neat because now I can connect some of my most interesting conversations back to InfraNodus, visualize them, store them there, and then also analyze them or also query them inside Claude itself. So this is also pretty useful that you can save graphs. And then here I'm asking it to specifically generate a research question using InfraNodus. So here it doesn't just generate the gaps, but it uses the tool that is available here. You see if you go to InfraNodus, generate research questions from text, and here it sent the whole summary which it generated here to InfraNodus, and then InfraNodus generated a research question based on this text. So this usually is a bit more precise and more interesting when InfraNodus generates the question because it identifies the gaps first. So what it does is that it looks at those gaps first. We have them here, right? It looks at the gaps and then it generates the question for them. So it's exactly the same thing as what would happen if you click this button here, but now it's happening inside Claude. So that's quite interesting. And by the way, when it generated the graph, what it also had as a response, you will see here, it actually has all the connectivity of the graph available to it, like the main connections between the main topics. So that's quite interesting because it also provides this insight to you, and this insight about the knowledge graph becomes available to Claude itself. So it's pretty good because now you can suddenly start connecting ideas together in a very interesting way. All right, the second use case that I want to demonstrate is when I'm asking Claude to tell me where in InfraNodus I'm talking about rhythms. So inside my InfraNodus account, I have multiple graphs here. There's like dozens of them. And now I can actually use this MCP server to search for my existing graphs. So if you already have an InfraNodus account, you will find that super useful because basically what it does is that it uses the search tool, which is available here. You see we have the search tool here. So it uses the search tool with this query rhythms. So find me everything on rhythms and all the graphs that have this information. And then it provides me a list of graphs that have rhythms inside of them and even the snippets of the text from them. So for example, it tells me, okay, these are the graphs. Now I ask it to say, okay, generate now some statements from those graphs that relate to rhythms. So it gives me an idea of what I was talking about when I was talking about rhythms or when I was researching them with InfraNodus. And then I ask it, okay, think of an interesting question to ask. First it thought of a question itself, and then I explicitly told it, okay, use InfraNodus to generate this question. Then it used the tool, generate question, from that specific graph, and then it generated me some really interesting questions that can help me move my research further. So that I also find pretty interesting because in this scenario, I took the knowledge I have on a certain topic from InfraNodus and then generated a question from it that helps me develop this research further and get into it, but based on what I already know, but at the same time showing me what I don't yet know, what connections I didn't make yet. So it's again exactly the same thing that's happening here when it identifies the topical gap between two different clusters and then tries to generate a question that would connect them together. And the whole intention here is to make you think in this direction and think how to somehow connect the different ideas that exist in any context in a new way, or even go beyond them, beyond the periphery of this graph. So that is very interesting, and now this way of thinking is available to you inside Claude or any LLM flows where you use this MCP server. So that use case is pretty interesting, and also what's nice is that once it has information about that graph, I can now interact with Claude and ask it what are the main relations that are available in this graph, right? So Claude also has this knowledge graph now in that context, so then it can use it to answer the questions about these ideas much better. So just like we did in the first case where we uploaded the research papers and we interacted with them through InfraNodus using its knowledge graph and also the content gap function, here we're interacting with the existing graphs. So that I find is pretty useful, and it gives you a lot of different possibilities. For instance, you could even do a research first in Claude on a certain subject, and then you could be like, okay, actually find something in InfraNodus where I already talked about it and use that context to enhance my research in that project. So all this visual way of thinking, connecting ideas together, making sure that you don't miss out on any gaps, develop the knowledge as a sort of sculpture that you're building with your ideas. Now it's all available inside any AI system or any agentic workflow, and I find that is very, very interesting, and I'm sure that you will have really nice experiments with it as well. Okay, so now that I showed you what's possible, let me show you how you can set it up yourself. So you basically have two ways to set it up. One way is for technical users, where you can just go to our repo on GitHub, which I will link to in the description to this video, and it has all the instructions on how to set it up locally. You would normally use it with your desktop version of Claude, right? So you would need to install Claude on your computer, and then you would connect MCP using the instructions which are given here. Or if you want an easier way where you don't have to deal with code, you can actually use our MCP server that's hosted on MCP server repository called Smithery. And here, when you search for InfraNodus, you will find this, and then you can simply connect to it using their server. So basically it's just one line, and they have instructions here on how to install it. All you need to do is to choose the client you use, or even just copy the URL and then integrate it into the tool that you're using. For instance, in Claude, if you want to use it in Claude, you have this function here where you go to settings, all right? And then you go into connectors, and then you can add custom connector, and then you just paste this link which you find in Smithery to the MCP server of InfraNodus, and then when you click add, the link actually should go here, and then you give it a name here, right? And then when you add it, it's just going to authenticate you on their server, and then you will be able to use it directly inside your web version of Claude. And by the way, you can use it the same way in N8N automation tool as well, or in any other tools. So if you find that you don't want to kind of go through all the coding, you can implement it this way. And what's cool also on Smithery is that you actually have a list of all the tools available to you here with the descriptions, and you can even see what parameters they use. So you can kind of get an idea of how the model is using the tool that you will be implementing in your workflows. So that's pretty useful, I find. All right, so once you install the tool, what you can do is to basically create a new chat. And here you can start interacting with it using the tool. So you need to make sure that the tool is on. And in order to do that, you go into search and tools, and then you make sure that this is turned on here. InfraNodus turned on, and then all the tools I used. But if you know that you're not going to use some tools, switch them off, because you don't want to overload your system with the different tools that are available to it. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to ask it a question about the graphs that we already have in InfraNodus. So one thing that I forgot to show you is that once you set up this knowledge graph MCP server, what you need to do is to configure it. If you do it through Smithery. So if you go to configure here, you will need to put in your InfraNodus API key, so InfraNodus knows to which account it should connect. And to get that API key, you go into your user account here, and you basically go into API, and you create a new key here, and then you would simply paste it into this configuration dialog here. And if you're installing it manually here, there is an instruction where you should put this key. So you see you will need to add InfraNodus server configuration, and here you will add the InfraNodus API key. So that's very important because it will allow InfraNodus to know which user it's talking to, and then save and retrieve graphs from your account. So for instance now, let me ask Claude, where am I talking about HRV in InfraNodus? All right, so normally I prefer to interact if I work on a specific project inside actually projects, not in chats like this, but for this demonstration, it's possible to just show you how it works like this, right? So here it's telling me that, okay, Claude wants to use search through existing InfraNodus graphs from InfraNodus, and here it's telling me that the query is going to be HRV heart rate variability, so you can also see what query it's going to make and approve it or not, right? Allow once, and then what's going to happen now is that InfraNodus will perform a search on this query and return a list of graphs to Claude that contain those search terms. So now it tells me that it found multiple InfraNodus graphs, and now it's fetching a result from each of them. So what's happening now is that it received the list of the graphs where I'm talking about HRV in my account, and now it's retrieving the actual content, what I'm talking about in those graphs, right? So here you see it's also for some reason it decided that I'm just going to get also some specific examples from specific graphs. So this is nice. It's kind of deciding on itself which graphs it's going to extract. And here it found that, for instance, there was a graph where I'm discussing HRV when I was analyzing Google search results for HRV. So this is very correct. And then variability PDFs. So this is actually pretty cool because it's the file that I was just showing you where I was demonstrating how those PDF papers look when visualized, and it retrieved exactly that. And even there was this conversation, the other one that I was having, it also retrieved that because I was talking about it there. And then it also retrieved the keywords that people use when they search for HRV because I was interested in that. So you see, it found all the graphs I have on HRV here, and it provided me a brief overview of what they're about. So for example, now I could be asking it, okay, take the keywords HRV graph and generate an interesting research question from it. Okay, so now what it's going to do is that it's going to retrieve that specific graph it found. Claude will understand that it needs to use this InfraNodus tool that retrieves the graph, right? So here you see it's using the generate research questions from an InfraNodus graph. Then it provides the graph name correctly, gap depth correctly. It will use several gaps, and it chooses to use a GPT-4 model. I run it, and now what's going to happen is that InfraNodus will perform exactly the same operation as I was showing you here. It will find this graph. Let me actually show you. This is the graph it's going to use. These are the keywords that people use when they search for HRV online, and then it's going to retrieve content gaps from this graph, different gaps that exist between different topics, and then it's going to visualize them inside in its own representation, and then generate interesting research questions that bridge those gaps together. So here you see, based on this representation, you see it had a response of 3 different questions. And now it says, okay, how does age and gender influence heart rate variability readings in Garmin Forerunner series? So it's talking about specific devices. So it's showing me that when people search for HRV, they're actually searching for specific devices. So now I can say, okay, how could this question be responded with the content I have in my, and then let's say, variability PDFs graph. Okay. So let's see what's going to happen here. If Claude will understand that it needs to retrieve this graph and then get the stuff. So yeah, it was very correct. Now it's extracting the graph from this variability PDFs context. So these are all the papers on PDFs. It's going to extract the graph. It's going to be actually quite huge, I think. And then it's basically going to say like, okay, now I want to feed this question to this graph and see how I could enhance it. So why this is important? Because this question is based on what people search for. So this identifies the real interest that people have for a certain topic. This is the research I'm working on. So the PDF papers is what I'm researching. And now I want to connect my interests to the interest of the people that are researching this subject. And this is what InfraNodus is helping me do. And this is why it's very nice to have those graphs separated in InfraNodus, because you can have these different contexts and then you can have them interact together in this way. Right, so here it says, okay, I'm going to use this name, this graph actually, right? And then I'm going to use this model, and then I'm going to send this prompt based on this question to this graph, and then let InfraNodus generate an answer. And that's actually pretty interesting because Claude realized that it has a tool inside InfraNodus that can generate an idea based on the existing graph. It understood that it needs to take this question, feed it to the graph, using the tool to provide a response. So that's pretty cool, because what you're doing is basically generating a research question based on this graph of what people search for, and then you feed it to the PDF papers, and then you use InfraNodus to extract insight exactly how you would do here, but all using the chat interface. And what's cool about that is that not that you just use the chat interface, but that imagine how you can implement it into LLM workflows and automate your research process, or if you're doing marketing research, this can also be pretty useful, right? So here it generated a research question based on this, actually an advice. So you see it has like a long advice, and then it's telling me, okay, so key resources from your graph from answering the question. So how can the research papers help bridge this gap in the search patterns that people have on this topic of HRV. So for instance, I should talk about methodological approaches available. If people are interested in HRV, maybe the scientific research can inform them on what are the different ways of measuring it. So that's very important because it would attract audience to the projects I'm working on, to the research or apps I'm building. The second one is also talking about relevant research workflows. So for example, how you can integrate mind and body using HRV as metric. So I think it relates to meditation studies that I have in those papers. Mood dynamic research. Also PTSD and depression studies. So you see a lot of concrete problems that can be solved using this HRV metric. So it gives me very good ideas for how I could promote this research and the tool that I'm building to help people measure HRV, because it connects their interests to the actual science that's happening on the subject. And then also it proposes me to think of the gaps and specific applications. So for instance, here you see one that can be very nice is that, for example, validating consumer device data. So you can actually use these algorithms to check if the algorithms of Garmin adequately capture age and gender variation. So also kind of fact checking the devices and also the limitations. So that's a really great overview. And this is how you would use it with your existing graphs. And if you wanted to use it with your existing papers, you would basically do the same thing. You would open a new project. You would upload your files here. So for example, let's say actually just on a fewer number of documents, I upload those documents here, maybe 3 last papers on HRV. It's going to take some time to get this data into Claude, and then it's going to index it, and then these PDFs will be available, and then I would be able to use InfraNodus to query those papers, generate research questions from them, generate gaps, get topical overviews, and all this stuff. So that I find is pretty cool. And if you want to know which tools you can use, you can simply go into the description of the tool here, and you can see what tools are available. These are just some basic functionalities that InfraNodus has, but we will be adding more in the end, and there is a more detailed description here when you go to Smithery or to our MCP server GitHub account. You can actually see what each of those tools can do. But if you come back to Claude, now you uploaded these papers, and you can say, provide me a topical overview of these papers. Okay, so let's see what's going to happen here. Maybe Claude will decide that it wants to do it on its own. Maybe it will decide to use the InfraNodus topical analysis tool to get the results. If it decides not to use InfraNodus, you can always tell it to use InfraNodus by making this demand explicit. But here you see it actually decided to use InfraNodus by itself. So Claude wants to use generate an overview of text. You see it provides an overview of those PDF documents. So this is pretty cool, like a very short one. But you could also ask it then, of course, to make it longer if you wanted to. And then it's going to give you a topical structure based on the InfraNodus response of what those documents are about, which is pretty neat. So with some tweaking and making sure that you verify what it's actually sending to InfraNodus, you can get a lot out of it, because instead of just getting these long AI responses, now you can use the wisdom of knowledge graphs that have a representation of any context as a topical structure here, right? So it knows what are the main topics inside, underneath, under the hood, and then you can use these additional insights to make sure that you're not missing on anything. So that I find is pretty interesting also for research, because instead of getting very predictable results from Claude, now you can get very interesting and detailed results from these knowledge graphs, and also make sure by observing the graphs you're working with that nothing is missing out. Or you can even delete some of the stuff from the graph. So for example, if you don't want anything about time integration, you can simply delete it here, then add it to the list of permanent stop words here. And then if you then use this graph later, InfraNodus will know not to use the statements that talk about time and intervals here. So that's going to be also pretty useful, because you can clean your data this way and then make sure that Claude only uses specific parts of the graph in order to provide you with relevant responses. So that I find is also pretty interesting. All right, I hope that this demonstration was useful and you find it interesting. If you have any specific questions, let me know. Also, on my other channel, I will record a more detailed video on how you can set up your own local version of this MCP tool with the Claude code. And we also have a new video there on our new NA10 community node, which basically enables you to do all that inside NA10 automation tool. But you can also use the MCP server inside NA10 as well, and it will have all the same tools available. If you have any questions, let me know. I hope you like this new feature, and I'm very curious to hear about your experience with it or the functionalities that you would like it to have. So please leave a comment below, and also if you like this content, please subscribe to this channel so that you can support us and make sure that the algorithm always helps us promote our ideas and knowledge to other people interested in the same stuff. Thank you.